millions watching. The stakes couldn't be higher, but Trump, he was ready for the fight of his life. The air inside the grand debate hall was electric. A packed audience, news anchors poised at their desks, cameras rolling from every angle. The biggest political showdown of the election season was about to unfold, and every major network had its eyes locked on the stage. This wasn't just a debate. It was a battle for the soul of America. The moderators, carefully selected from top media outlets, sat at a long, polished desk, their expressions serious, their hands gripping their neatly stacked question cards. They had spent weeks preparing, rehearsing their questions, fine-tuning their strategy. Their mission? To put Donald Trump on the defensive, to corner him, to expose him in a way that would leave him vulnerable. But Trump wasn't a man easily backed into a corner. On one side of the stage stood Senator Mark Reynolds, a polished, seasoned career politician with decades of experience in Washington. He had the support of the media, the donors, the establishment. He was ready with scripted answers, perfectly timed gestures, and a well-rehearsed attack plan. The political elite had pinned their hopes on him, and on the other side, Donald Trump. He walked onto the stage calm, collected, carrying the kind of confidence that rattled his enemies before a single word was spoken. He was no stranger to high-pressure environments, no stranger to confrontation. As he took his place behind the podium, he gave a quick nod to the roaring crowd, flashing that familiar smirk, a smirk that said he already knew how this was going to play out. The moderator leaned forward, her voice crisp, professional, but laced with an underlying hostility. Mr. Trump, Senator Reynolds, welcome. Tonight we will be discussing the key issues that matter most to the American people. A measured, rehearsed pause. Then she continued, Mr. Trump, let's start with you. Some have argued that your policies in office were reckless and divisive. Many believe they hurt more Americans than they helped. How do you respond to that? A thinly veiled attack, disguised as a question. The first shot had been fired. The media and establishment figures watching from behind the scenes leaned in, waiting, hoping for a misstep. Trump tilted his head slightly, absorbing the words, letting them hang in the air just long enough to make the audience feel the weight of them. He knew how this game worked. He had played it before, and he had won. Then, without hesitation, he spoke. First of all, let's get something straight. I didn't hurt America. I made America stronger. I made America safer. I made America richer. And that's exactly why I'm standing here tonight. While your establishment politicians are scrambling behind the scenes, hoping I somehow disappear. The audience stirred. A murmur of approval. The moderator straightened in her seat. Reynolds, standing just a few feet away, maintained his carefully trained composure. But something flickered in his eyes, something resembling hesitation. Trump continued, his voice unwavering. The real question should be, why are people like you and your network so afraid of me? Why do you twist facts? Why do you push narratives that don't match reality? The American people aren't stupid. They see what's happening. They know that under my leadership, they had jobs, they had security, and they had a country that actually put them first. A pause. Then, leaning slightly forward, he delivered the first real blow of the night. You want to talk about reckless? Let's talk about career politicians like my opponent, Mark Reynolds. People like him have been making promises for 30 years. And what do we have to show for it? Higher taxes, weaker borders, endless wars, and a government that cares more about global interests than its own citizens. So you tell me, who's really hurting America? The audience erupted into applause. The first clash had ended, and Trump had emerged unscathed. Reynolds, shifting his weight ever so slightly, glanced at the moderator, waiting for her to step in to regain control. But the damage was done. The tone of the debate had been set. This wasn't going to be a takedown of Trump. This was going to be a fight. And Trump? He was just getting warmed up. Reynolds thought he had Trump cornered, but what happened next left the audience stunned. The moderator adjusted her glasses, glancing at her cue cards before shifting her gaze to Senator Mark Reynolds. It was his turn, and this, they believed, was the moment he would land the first real hit of the debate. Reynolds straightened his tie, his expression measured, confident. He had rehearsed this attack for weeks, preparing with top political strategists. The talking points had been refined, the delivery sharpened to perfection. This was supposed to be the moment Trump stumbled. He turned toward the audience, adopting the polished, practiced tone of a seasoned politician. Mr. Trump likes to talk about his so-called success in office, Reynolds began, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. But let's look at the facts. Under his administration, we saw instability in international relations, reckless economic policies, and a deeply divided country. The American people deserve a leader who unites, not divides. A leader who builds, not one who destroys. And tonight, I ask you all, are we truly better off after his time in office? A carefully calculated pause. The audience murmured, but before anyone could digest his words, Trump lifted a hand, signaling he was ready to respond. The moderator, hesitant but bound by debate rules, nodded, and then Trump spoke. "You know, it's funny," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Every time a career politician like Mark Reynolds stands on a debate stage, they say the same thing. We need unity, we need stability, we need leadership. But let me ask you something, Mark. Where was your leadership when the economy was failing before I took office? Where was your unity when you and your friends in Washington were selling out the American people for corporate interests?" The audience stirred, sensing the shift in energy. Reynolds blinked, his confidence faltering for just a moment. Trump pressed on. "You talk about division. Let me tell you who divided this country. The politicians who forgot about the working-class American. The media that lied to them every single day. The bureaucrats who told them their jobs were never coming back. I didn't divide America. I woke it up. And that's why you and your friends are so scared right now. Because for the first time in decades, the American people are thinking for themselves." The audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. The moderator quickly stepped in, trying to regain control. "Mr. Trump," she interjected, "while we appreciate your response, the question was about your administration's policies and whether they truly benefited the country. Would you care to directly address that?" Trump smirked. "Oh, I'll address it, don't worry. But first, let's talk about Mark Reynolds' record, because, folks, it's incredible. He talks a big game, but in his 30 years in Washington, can anyone here name a single policy of his that actually helped the American people?" "I'll wait." Silence. Reynolds tensed. This wasn't how the exchange was supposed to go. Trump continued, his tone growing sharper. "Under my administration, we had record-low unemployment, the strongest economy in modern history, and energy independence. We cut taxes for working Americans. We secured the border. And what did Mark Reynolds and his establishment pals do? They fought me every step of the way because they weren't working for you. They were working for themselves." The audience roared with approval. The energy in the room was undeniable. Reynolds clenched his jaw. He had walked into this debate believing Trump was vulnerable, that he could control the conversation, dictate the narrative. But he was losing grip. Trump turned directly toward Reynolds, his voice dropping slightly, making every word land with precision. "You spent decades talking about change. I actually made change happen." And that's the difference between you and me, Mark. I built businesses. You built excuses. I created jobs. You created bureaucracy. And the American people, they see it. They know the truth. And that's why you're sweating right now. The moderator attempted to speak, but Trump held up a hand. No, let's let Mark respond. I'm curious. Do you have a single example of a policy you enacted that helped real Americans? Just one? Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavy and humiliating. Trump smiled. That's what I thought. The audience roared again. The first real blow of the debate had landed, and it had landed hard. They always do this. But Trump was 10 steps ahead. The air in the debate hall had shifted. The audience knew it. The moderators knew it. Even Senator Mark Reynolds knew it. The first round of attacks had failed, and Trump had not only defended himself, he had gone on the offensive. The establishment hadn't planned for this. They had hoped Trump would stumble, that he would react emotionally, that they could paint him as unhinged and reckless. But instead, he had remained calm, sharp, and devastatingly effective. That's when the moderator decided it was time to step in. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but laced with an unmistakable undertone of bias. Mr. Trump, let's address something that many Americans have concerns about. Over the years, your rhetoric has been described as divisive, even dangerous. Some say it has fueled tensions in this country, creating deep divisions among Americans. Do you take responsibility for that? A carefully crafted question, one designed to corner him. Trump tilted his head just slightly and let the silence stretch for a moment. He could feel the anticipation in the air, the expectation that he would fumble, that he would lash out. Instead, he smiled. That's a great question, he said, his tone almost amused. And let's be honest, we all know exactly what you're trying to do here. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. The moderator stiffened slightly. This wasn't the response she had expected. You say my rhetoric is divisive? Trump continued. Let me ask you something. When the media spends years calling me and my supporters racists, bigots, extremists, do you take responsibility for that? When networks like yours push false stories, twist words, and create hysteria, do you ever stop and say, wow, maybe we're the ones fueling division? The moderator opened her mouth, but Trump pressed on, not giving her the chance. Because let's be very clear, he said, his voice steady and firm. It's not my words that divide this country. It's the lies. It's the spin. It's the constant effort by networks like yours to turn Americans against each other, to create fear, to silence people who think differently. That's what's divisive. A loud burst of applause filled the hall. The moderator shifted in her seat. Reynolds glanced at her, silently urging her to regain control. She adjusted her notes, quickly pivoting. Mr. Trump, while we appreciate your perspective, let's focus on some specific incidents. Many believe your words have incited real-world consequences, including violent events. What do you say to those who argue that your rhetoric has led to dangerous outcomes? Trump let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. You see, that's the game, isn't it? He said. You take something completely out of context, twist it, repeat it enough times, and suddenly it becomes fact. But let me ask you this. When politicians on the left encourage protests that turn violent, when they refuse to condemn rioters who burn cities to the ground, do you bring them on your network and ask if they take responsibility? No, you don't, because it doesn't fit the narrative you're pushing. The audience erupted again. The tension in the room was thick, but there was no mistaking the energy shift. Trump was dismantling the moderator in real time. The moderator leaned forward, visibly frustrated. Mr. Trump, this isn't about other politicians. This is about you. Are you denying that your words have ever led to dangerous situations? Trump's expression hardened. I will never apologize for standing up for the American people, he said. I will never apologize for telling the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Because the real danger isn't my words. It's the people in power who want to control what you can say, what you can think, and what you can believe. Silence. Then another eruption of applause. The moderator exhaled slowly, shifting in her seat, glancing at Reynolds for help. But Reynolds looked rattled, as if realizing that this debate wasn't going the way he had expected. Trump leaned slightly toward his microphone, delivering one final blow. The American people are tired of being lied to. They're tired of watching networks like yours push fear instead of facts. So if you want to talk about division, start by looking in the mirror. The moderator opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the debate hall exploded into cheers. For the second time that night, Trump had turned the trap back on his opponents, and there was still more to come. And then he crossed the line. The moderator had barely regained her composure when Senator Mark Reynolds saw his opportunity. He had been waiting for this moment. His carefully crafted knockout punch, the one that would leave Trump reeling. He knew he had failed to shake Trump so far, but this time he was certain the former president wouldn't escape unscathed. Reynolds straightened his tie, forced a knowing smirk, and turned toward Trump. He leaned slightly forward, his voice lowered just enough to make it seem like he was about to deliver a devastating revelation. Mr. Trump, he began, pausing for dramatic effect. Beyond all the policies, beyond all the campaign rhetoric, beyond all the headlines, we have to ask a fundamental question. And that question is about character. The crowd stirred, sensing the shift in tone. Reynolds continued, his voice steady, calculated. You talk about loyalty, about strength, about leadership, but let's talk about the lawsuits, the accusations, the so-called scandals that have followed you for years. The question is simple. How can the American people trust a man whose name has been attached to controversy at every turn? A murmur rippled through the audience. The media had been waiting for this exact moment. Twitter feeds lit up. Headlines were already being typed. They had seen this strategy before, make it personal, make it about Trump's past, put him on the defensive. But Trump, he didn't blink. Instead, he smirked. Mark, I have to say, I expected better, Trump said, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. You spent all of this time preparing, and this is the best you could come up with? The audience laughed, some loudly, others nervously. Reynolds tensed, not expecting the light-hearted dismissal. Trump continued, his tone growing sharper. You're talking about controversy, Mark. You mean the controversies created by the same media sitting in this room? The fake stories, the anonymous sources, the headlines designed to smear, to distract, to manipulate. The American people see through it. They know what's real and what's just another political hit job. Reynolds attempted to cut in, but Trump raised a finger. No, you ask the question. Let me answer it. Trump leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel intimate, like he was speaking directly to the people watching at home. You want to talk about character, Mark? Let's talk about it. Because while I was out there building businesses, creating jobs, fighting for this country, you were in Washington making backroom deals, collecting checks from lobbyists, and selling out the very people you claim to represent. The crowd erupted. Even those who had been neutral so far found themselves nodding. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably but forced a chuckle. Mr. Trump, deflecting doesn't change the facts. The fact is, Trump interrupted, that politicians like you have spent decades failing the American people. And now, When faced with someone who actually did something, you resort to cheap attacks because you have nothing else to stand on. You talk about trust? The people don't trust you, Mark. And that's why you're standing here desperate, hoping for a knockout punch that isn't coming. The air was thick with tension. Reynolds tried to respond, but nothing he could say would erase the fact that Trump had turned his attack back on him effortlessly. The moderator hesitated before finally interjecting. "Gentlemen, let's keep this focused on the issues. Senator Reynolds, would you like to respond?" Reynolds straightened, gripping the edges of his podium. "Yes, actually, I would." But before he could continue, Trump turned back to the crowd, speaking over him. "See, folks, that's the difference between us. I talk results. He talks gossip. I talk about what's best for the country. He talks about headlines. And that's why I win." The audience exploded. The moderator tried to regain control, but it was futile. The damage was done. And Mark Reynolds? He had just made the biggest mistake of his political career. What happened next would go down in debate history. The room had barely settled from the seismic impact of Trump's last response. The moderator looked rattled. Senator Mark Reynolds had lost all of his confidence, and the audience was now fully engaged. Some erupting in applause, others watching in stunned silence. Trump, unfazed, stood confidently at his podium, waiting. He knew what was coming. The media, the establishment, the opposition, they all had one last desperate move. The moderator, regaining her composure, leaned forward. "Mr. Trump, let's move on. The American people deserve to know. What do you say to those who claim your leadership has been reckless, that your policies have harmed this country more than helped it, and that electing you again would be, in their words, a dangerous gamble?" Reynolds, still reeling, suddenly came to life, nodding vigorously. "Yes, that's the question we need answered. America has seen the chaos, the instability. Why should we believe it will be any different this time?" For the first time, Trump didn't immediately answer. Instead, he took a long pause, scanning the audience, making sure every single person in the room, and millions watching at home, was hanging on to his every word. Then he leaned into the microphone. "Because I get results." Silence. He let the words settle before continuing, his voice unwavering. "Reckless? What's reckless is leaving our borders wide open while crime skyrockets. What's reckless is sending billions overseas while Americans struggle to pay for groceries. What's reckless is the same politicians like my opponent sitting in Washington for decades, making promises they never keep." The moderator tried to interrupt, but Trump held up a hand. No, let me finish." He turned to Reynolds, a slight smirk forming. "You want to talk about instability? Let's talk about how your policies destroyed American jobs. Let's talk about how the people you work for, because let's be honest, you don't work for the people. You work for special interests and donors." Reynolds opened his mouth, but Trump wasn't done. "I built businesses. I built an economy that was stronger than ever. I created jobs. I put America first. And when they realized I wasn't going to play by their rules, they tried to stop me. But guess what? They failed." The audience erupted. Even those who had walked in neutral couldn't ignore the power behind his words. Trump pressed forward, delivering the final blow. "You call it chaos. I call it shaking up a system that was broken. And the reason they fear me isn't because I'm reckless. It's because I actually get things done." The moderator, now visibly uncomfortable, attempted to steer the conversation back. But it was too late. The defining moment of the debate had already happened. Trump had won. Reynolds, looking drained, tried one last desperate move. "Mr. Trump, you continue to deflect and dodge. What do you say to Americans who don't trust you?" Trump smiled. almost as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. I say the American people aren't stupid. They see the results. They see the truth. And that's why they'll make the right choice when the time comes. The crowd erupted once more. The moment would go viral, turned into clips, memes, and headlines across every major network. The establishment had tried to stop him, and once again, they had failed. So, within hours, the internet was on fire and the media scrambling for damage control. The debate stage had barely emptied before the real battle began. On social media, on news channels, in political circles. Within minutes, the first clips were already circulating online. The moment Trump delivered his final blow, the moment Reynolds stammered in silence, the moment the moderator lost control. It was all there, cut into perfect, shareable snippets. On Twitter, #TrumpDominates was the #1 trending topic worldwide. That was a masterclass in political combat, one viral tweet read. They tried to set him up and he destroyed them. Meme pages exploded with content. One particularly viral image showed Trump leaning into the microphone with the caption, "Because I get results." Another had a side-by-side of Reynolds before and after the debate, one confident, the other visibly defeated, with the words, "That's the look of a man who just lost everything." Fox News ran the headline, "Trump stuns debate stage, leaves opponent speechless." CNN, desperate to spin the narrative, tried a different approach, Trump's dangerous rhetoric on full display. But the damage was already done. The real reaction, the one that mattered, was coming from the people. YouTube was flooded with breakdown videos from political commentators, each one analyzing how Trump had controlled the debate from start to finish. Independent news outlets couldn't ignore what had happened. Even some left-leaning analysts had to admit, like it or not, Trump dominated that stage. Meanwhile, at campaign headquarters, Reynolds' team was in crisis mode. Donors were calling, concerned. His advisors knew the truth. There was no coming back from this. The viral nature of the moment ensured it would be replayed for weeks, if not months. The headlines wouldn't go away. Reynolds himself had gone dark, avoiding the press, issuing only a generic statement about standing firm on his beliefs. But the reality was clear. His campaign was over before it had even truly begun. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump sat back, watching the chaos unfold. He had been here before. He knew how the game was played. He took a sip of Diet Coke and grinned. His phone buzzed. Another notification, another million views, another headline. He turned to his advisors. "They never learn, do they?" They laughed. No, they didn't. And that's why they kept losing. The debate had been a battle. The aftermath, a landslide. And Trump? He was already looking ahead. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. This wasn't just a debate. This was a political earthquake. If you enjoyed this moment, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more. Because something tells me Trump's just getting started.